good afternoon. Happy Monday. Hope everyone had an amazing holiday weekend, or if you didn't celebrate a particular holiday, then just had an amazing weekend. I had fun. It was a blast as usual. Maybe didn't get as much rest. I feel like I need a weekend for my weekend, but that's Christmas, up late doing stuff, wrapping gifts. Went to the circus yesterday with my daughter for the first time. That was first time for her, not first time for me. That was a lot of fun, certainly an experience. Today I'm here to talk about Never Going Home, I guess World War I apocalyptic horror RPG is kind of what I'm calling it. I've only had a chance to flip through it briefly when I met up with Wet Ink Games over at PAX Unplugged recently. I don't have any particular programming notes. I'm supposed to have an interview with one of those guys tomorrow. We'll see if that holds up. I reached out to them to kind of confirm, and I'm waiting to hear back. So hopefully that doesn't get scuttled. Though who knows? It's the holidays. I know things get kind of crazy. So it wouldn't surprise me if we end up moving it, but we'll see. That said, let's get into it because I know there's a lot here. I love the art on the cover. Definitely gives us a feel for what this game is going to be like. Gas masks, antlers, sabers, and bolt action rifles. Looks like some kind of cuts or kind of tattoos or sort of on one guy's arms. A lot of things going on here. Let's dig in. This is using their, I guess what Wet Ink Games calls their +1 system. This is the first time I have seen the +1 system. The other Wet Ink Games supplement that I have seen is Into the Weird and Wild, which is a supplement, is a supplement, I suppose, a rules set. So that one is I believe fairly rules agnostic. This uses a system. We'll have to get in there. I know that also they have a similar one of these that takes place during Roman times that I really also want to check out as well. Also uses the +1 system. I'm not sure if this is the first one of their games to use it or if they use it somewhere else. These are things that I will ask them on the morrow if that does take place. Death is what we see when awake. When we are asleep, it is dreams. Heraclitus. Complete fragments. Fragment 21. Table of contents. As usual, I'm going to try to pick and choose the stuff I cover just because there is a lot of it, and I'm not sure how long I could go. I could maybe go a shade over an hour. We'll see. But still, there's kind of a lot to cover. It's not a huge book. Unfortunately, the print version is very nice. I don't have it in, of course, as I get ready to do this. Of course, what I forget is to have the print version to show off. I'll try to show it off. I think I showed it off in my coming back from PAX Unplugged video. You can probably see that there. A bit of the book. I think it's that A4, A5 version, kind of half letter size. I forget if it's A4 or A5, whichever one that is. We have a bit of a, I don't know, call it a preamble, perhaps, to the memory of my great-grandfather, Frederick Edwin Kilpatrick, whose 1917 Army registration form shows he changed his listed occupation from school teacher to carpenter. I take that as a story about what it means to go away to war. That was a full dedication from Matthew Orr, and then to those who came home, to those who were left in the mud, to that half cigarette. Is the dedication from Brandon Atten. Another dedication reads, this book is dedicated to those who never stop pushing me. To Beth Geoghegan and Gary Stewart, thank you, seeing my potential and giving me the tools to grow. To Dale Hucott, thank you for sticking with me all these years and being my sounding board. To anyone who ever listened to me recite historical facts and retell stories from the past, thank you for listening and for asking the questions that made me want to dig deeper. Finally, this book is dedicated to all those who went missing during the Great War from 1914 to 1918, and particularly to those men and women whose ultimate end remains a mystery. Your stories are still being told. You are not forgotten. That's from Sarah Atten. To the men and women who go through the real hell of war so that most of us can live in peace is the dedication from Irvin Jackson. And finally, to those who need it the most, despite the horror and monsters in front of you, there's always hope and a future worth fighting for. Dedication from Charles Ferguson Avery. We get some. All right, I'm definitely going to read this one because I think it's always important. These sections kind of that seem to be detailing what the game is about, what we should be expecting, what the goals of the authors are. I don't even, by the way, my great Not my great grandfather. My grandfather fought somewhat in the First World War. It's really kind of a mystery. I didn't get the full story of it, but he actually came down with the flu. So in sort of the pandemic for my family was a bit of a coming full circle because my grandfather survived the flu epidemic that arose during the Great War and then was kind of forgotten and then kind of resurfaced when COVID started breaking the news. The Buy-In. Never Going Home is a party-focused role-playing game set in horror-haunted trenches during the First World War. If that sounds good to you, skip this page and get ready to deploy. If you aren't sure, read on to see if Never Going Home is for you. So this is good, right? So if you are, look, if this speaks to you, it definitely speaks to me. We don't need to do it. But if we're not sure, we can read on. Okay, so the first bullet here is role-playing game. I'm going to skip those, the kind of, what is a role-playing game? What is dice? What is a pen? What is paper? I will read the next one, though, because it seems like it's telling us something more about the game itself and not just on the role-playing games in general. Party-focused. Never Going Home uses the +1 system to focus play and growth on what an individual character can do as part of the larger story that follows a group of soldiers called a unit. Individual characters may depart regularly as they die from injuries or collapse into madness due to forces from beyond the veil. Characters are quick to create, so players should expect to rejoin the story portraying a new member of the unit. Each character can have their own heroic moments, but the story of the unit is the focus. That's really good to know. I think this is something that should come up more often. I think we often think of kind of, not even necessarily want to say problem characters, but often or problem players, maybe is the better word. But the idea of the players and characters being focused on their own stories, and they don't care so much about the group. The party is just kind of there to get me to find my lost sister. But if I have to leave to find my lost sister, I'm off doing that. And the party can either come with me or not. And then if somebody else wants to go do their thing, you can see that the party, there's not really a party. Right? And a lot of times I often will have mentioned trying to build things around that party as part of your character generation, that session 0. Build the party. Why are you here with these particular people playing, doing these particular things? And this, of course, talking about putting it right up front. Hey, this is party focused. This is all about the unit. It's not about your particular character. Sure, as part of the unit, they're important, but ultimately it's the unit. It's the group that's the important thing, more than particular characters. Know Nothing says, interested how party focused plays. Yes, it will be interesting to see what tools they put in place, if they put any in place, for strengthening that or reinforcing that or enforcing that as much as it can be enforced. Horror haunted. The veil between worlds has been opened by the slaughter from the war, and the monstrous whispers, capital W, of beings wholly alien to humanity can now be heard. Some people have listened to the whispers enough to gain arcane powers and now struggle to maintain control as their minds and bodies begin to change. Others are too far gone, mutated into barely recognizable versions of their former selves. War consumes the days and monsters stalk the nights. Not even dreams are safe. Players manage their characters' mental and emotional resources with a dwindling hand of cards. Another thing says, I think party focused is a great way to communicate that idea. Yeah, absolutely. I think if nothing else, you've put it out there, right? If you hand this out to your players and you say, look, I can't force you to be about the party in terms of I can't tell you not to try to put your character first, but in terms of how things are gonna operate and how the game is, this is what it's gonna be like. So when you're asking me as a GM, if I have to pick between your player and your character and the unit, the answer is the unit, and you know that, right? So yeah, I do think there's value in just facing it out there. Hey, it's here, as opposed to burying it into some kind of an unspoken ethos, which you hope that parties and groups are going to spread amongst themselves. Like in kind of D&D, they never really, for the most part, put that out there, even though that's obviously what you need to do. They kind of depend on, well, groups are going to kind of police themselves. And they do for the most part, but some of the issues maybe could be relieved a little bit if they would just say, hey, it's about the party. The First World War. The setting is the real Earth, and the characters are all humans. A terrible new element has been added to the war, but the true horrors of the real war are part of the story as well. The game is set in the years between when the veil was torn in 1916 and when the war really ended in 1918. The focus is on the frontline soldiers who are fighting and experiencing the worst of the magic and monsters. There is some mention made of, but little exploration of, the home fronts of any of the belligerents, and civilians only appear in passing. All right, so we're definitely focused on the war, focused on the battlefield, no man's land, the trenches, those areas. We're not really going home. We're not concerned about what's happening in London in 1917. It's not really what this is about. Thank you for reading. Hopefully now you know if this game is for you or not. We hope it is. Your first mission is waiting. Well, I'm still in. If there was a question, I'm still in. So let's see what we have. Whew. All right, I'm probably going to scan. Seems good, and it seems like we have a letter here dated October 18, 1917, to His Royal Highness King George V in London, England, from Douglas Haig, Commander-in-Chief, British Expeditionary Force. I'm going to read some of it. It's kind of long, and I don't want to get too wrapped up in some of these things, but I do want to read at least the beginning because I think it's more scene setting, telling us kind of how maybe some bit of this breaking of the veil and what it is. So I'll start from the top. Enclosed is a report. Oh, and I'm not going to try to do the British accent, so I apologize in advance. You're going to read it. You're going to hear it as, American English. Enclosed is the report I am required to submit regarding my involvement in and knowledge of the events that occurred at the Somme battlefield beginning July 1, 1916. The following documents have been collected from various sources, but the primary content of this manuscript is a replica of the journal of Alfred Warbeck, an English soldier who served during the Great War. The discovery of his journal in Delville Wood in the spring of this year, it gave us a window into the early days of the catastrophe, capital C. It is a shame that we don't know what happened to him, but that's a fate that has befallen many an Englishman, among other nations' soldiers for certain, since the outbreak of the war in 1914. Had he lived through the attack at Longueval in 1916, he would be a valuable resource to us now. Yet, despite his absence in this world, he has provided us valuable information about how these beasts and their masters are conjured, what they want now that they are here, and how to interact with them without becoming corrupted by their vile magics. All right, so we have kind of this point of view character whose name Alfred Warbeck, who clearly has been around, and though he has not survived, or maybe he has survived, or he's hidden somewhere, who knows if he's actually dead or just missing, and yet out there, he has put together some materials, which I presume is going to be most of the things that we know from a game standpoint about what to do about these horrible things. Playing the game. Skill rolls. When a character wants to do something, they may be asked to make a skill roll against a target number, TN. Some target numbers are set by missions. The narrator sets all other target numbers. Players roll d6 dice, called skill dice, equal to their training in the skill. Dice showing 5 or 6 are successes. So this is a dice pool with about 5 or 6. That's 2 out of 6. That's 33, 33%. The number of successes on the roll must meet or exceed the target number to accomplish the action. On each roll, the player may use as many +1 manipulations equal to their current score of the governing attribute of the skill being rolled. Attributes do not decrease through use. All right, so we'll definitely have to see some examples of this, but I'm guessing you're going to have something like, okay, there's a target number of 2, and you have 3 in a skill, so you would roll 3 dice. And then I suppose if it was, say, ye old strength athletics check, and you have a plus or whatever 3 in strength, you could add 3 to those rolls. Maybe not. Walk in the Path. Hey, Walk in the Path says, this setting is my jam. Awesome. I think it's going to be pretty cool. Yeah, I'm definitely, as a thing, I'm more interested in the setting than in the system per se. Not that I'm not interested in the system, but I'm kind of like really wanting to get in the setting. So I may breeze through this system stuff somewhat to get to the good old setting stuff, or at least the stuff that's more setting dependent. Failure simply means what the character is attempting doesn't happen. All skill rolls take the form of roll, insert skill name, target number, which means roll the dice equal to skill training Manipulate the dice equal to attribute rank. Meet at least the required number of successes. All right, so getting to the skill manipulation part. The attributes are linked to specific skills which dictate which ones they can manipulate. A character's score in a skills governing attribute dictates how many times a skill roll can be manipulated. A roll can be manipulated in the following ways. One thing, it would have been nice to see the attributes before we got into using them to manipulate stuff, but I'm guessing we're going to get the attributes fairly soon. Frederick Ward says we need a Panzer. I think we'll have to wait for the Second World War version. I'm sure that they'll do one. I mean, I can't imagine that you wouldn't want to either as an a setting book for this, or another one is to have one where, hey, whatever happened in 1914 or 1916 to 1918, whatever broke the veil, it's got to be that would break somewhere or multiple places in the World War II. So, yeah, we got to get our unearthly panzers in the mix. A roll can be manipulated in the following ways. Before a roll, temporarily gain an untrained skill. Dice are bought separately. Add a die to the roll. Example, roll 4 dice on a skill with 3 training. Or after a roll, add a pip to the die. Change a 4 to a 5. Reroll any number of dice. Keep the result once per skill roll. Okay, so here we get an example. Simpson has 2 training in ranged and 3 ranks of guts. To hit an injured trench stalker requires 4 successes. Oh, I like a trench stalker already. His player buys 2 extra dice with 2 points of guts and rolls 5, 4, 3, 1. He keeps the 5 and rolls the remaining 3 again. 6, 5, 2. A total of only 3 successes. The shot misses. All right, so from this example, I'm guessing he had 3 guts, used 2 to buy the extra dice, used the third one to re-roll. He could have also used that one to change that 4 to a 5 if he wanted to. But that, of course, would not have helped either, though maybe he could have changed that 4 to a 5 and then re-rolled the last 2 dice looking for 2 successes. We have another example. Roth has no training in communication, but 4 smarts. Trying to get useful information from a raving soldier is TN2. Her player buys the communication skill for the roll and 2 dice, then rolls 5, 4. She spends her last point of smarts to add a pip to the 4, giving her the 2 successes she needs. So she had 4 smarts. Let's see. Buys a communication skill for 1, and then 2 dice for 3, and then, okay, so I think that works. And then use the last one. All right, I guess I'm getting it. I feel like I'm getting it. Terrence says, monsters came after humans douse each other in delicious mustard gas. Tangy. Frederick adds, sort of a sweet and sour sauce. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's a cool idea. It's one that I've used for things like undead, right? That where do undead and where do these creatures come from? It comes from these, or I mean, it's not even it's my idea. I mean, it's something that comes up oftentimes with why do hauntings and different paranormal things take place? They take place in places where these horrible things have happened, where our suffering has rent the curtains that divide our world from some other world. So it's a very cool idea. And so a place like the trenches and no man's land and whatnot is kind of the perfect place. I don't say perfect in a terrible way for these things to come out, which of course would also reason why it would make super sense in World War II, which was at least as bad, at least equally as bad. There's a cool YouTube on flying a Fokker triplane, Frederick Works says. I bet. I mean, people have made cool videos about all kinds of crazy, awesome things. All right, so let me just take a swig of soda for the working man. Throughout the game, challenges. Throughout the game, points that represent significant barriers to the characters. These are things that will happen if encountered. No bypassing or talking their way out of them. The narrator may sometimes insert other challenges as needed. Too big to work alone, requires to work together. Challenge may be accomplished by the group. One skill roll that every person must succeed at, or even one skill roll with such a high target number that multiple players must make the roll and combine their successes. Challenges take the form of challenge. Okay, so we get some kind of formula for what they're going to look like in the text, which means each character participating in the challenge makes the appropriate skill roll individually, then pool total successes, meet at least the required number of successes. Basically, it's a skill challenge. Unlike skill rolls, failure of a challenge can have a penalty associated with failure. We got a cool picture of looks like one survivor in their gas mask with a whole bunch of piled bodies in a trench behind them. We have a letter from Alfred to Mary Warbeck. I'm going to pass over that for the moment. We get to cards. The journey, healing, and character growth. A standard deck of 52 playing cards with 2 jokers is used to represent the emotional resources and memories of the characters. For 6 or more players, 2 decks, each with 2 jokers, are shuffled together. The players may use any decks they have on hand. The 4 traditional suits are called for in the game, so the cards shouldn't be recognizable as such. Each suit is tied to a specific narrative theme. All right, so I like the playing cards, and I think it's kind of thematic for war games. Always people think of soldiers playing cards, yada, yada, yada. Nothing is not pleased by the language around skill challenges. No bypassing the challenge. Not sure what that means, but I'm not sure I like that. Well, if we're looking at skill challenges, it could be something like, hey, the building's crumbling around you. Here we're going to do the skill challenge to get out. And there's no way to get out other than the skill challenge. It doesn't necessarily have to mean that you're necessarily being railroaded, but oftentimes, at least originally when I saw them come in 4th edition, it was things like that. Or you're on something is chasing you. The boulder in Indiana Jones is rolling behind you, and you have to make these skill challenges to get out of the tomb before the boulder catches up to you. Just by nature of the situation, you kind of have limited things to do. No, you can't turn and talk to the boulder. No, there's no other exits or a way out. It's really about these things you have to do. If we were talking about, I don't know, I'm sure you could come up with other ones, maybe something with zombies where it's like, well, yeah, you can't talk to the zombies. The zombies don't care to talk to you. You have to figure something out. And you could say, if you don't have a cleric or for whatever reason they can't be turned, or in this game maybe there is no turning, then you just have to deal with the zombies in another, in a different way, or just run away from them, do whatever. So ultimately, well, I can understand the concern for, hey, are they, what are these skill challenges kind of things? Are they just going to be kind of roping us into doing things and taking away our options? I'm hoping that when they're used, it's going to be something where, because of the context, there's not a whole lot of other options that are workable. All right, getting back to these cards. Each suit is tied to a specific narrative theme: spades, knowledge, learning, growing, overcoming suffering; clubs, things, overcoming obstacles, action, adventure; hearts are relationships, emotion, or connection; diamonds are self, ambition, or hopes. Jokers. A joker is considered wild and functions as one non-joker card each time it is played or revealed. After a joker is played or revealed for any reason, reshuffle the deck, including the joker. The black joker also triggers a draw for possible corruption. Oh, so we have going to have a corruption mechanic. Let's see. No, nothing else says okay, but I mean, Indy could have just not gone in the cave and then not needed the skill challenge. Well, yes, nothing. But in the case of Indy, the skill challenge didn't come up when he entered the cave. It only came up when he was trying to leave the cave after that trap had, triggered. So I think, yes, he could have avoided it by not going in the cave, but presumably they're not going to force you in the tomb exiting skill challenge if you never actually enter the cave. And then Terrence says, maybe it means that by the time you're in the skill challenge territory, you've already passed enough decision points that you were locked in. That's another thing, right? We don't know. We don't know. I'm assuming things like that, yes, and not, we're just going to kind of sucker you into something that you don't mean to do. But we'll see. We'll see when we get to some examples. So we know we have a corruption mechanics. We have jokers. Do the jokers usually come in 2 colors? Is there both a red and a black joker? Because I don't know, maybe. Because if you don't, then the black joker triggering corruption, I guess you have to make sure you have at least, you might have to, depending on your deck of cards, figure out which joker is going to be your corruption joker. Each card in the player's hands represent their character's memories and constitute what makes them human. Anytime a player is forced or chooses to play a card, they should think of it as their character forgetting something about themselves. Cards in hand should always be kept secret. After played cards are resolved, the narrator moves them to a discard pile kept behind the narrator screen. Aces are high, maximum hand size. Cards are earned as a reward for surviving missions, completing special tasks, defeating antagonists, or when the narrator thinks the player has done something awesome. Cards serve multiple purposes in the game. All right, I really like the card mechanic. I really like the idea that these cards are kind of define you, so you can play them to do things, but playing them starts to whittle away at your character's sense of self. And of course, the more cards you play, the less you have. And presumably, if you end up with an empty hand, you're probably toast, either mentally or physically, which is very cool. Interesting to see how these are played, because we are going to be rolling dice, because we already went through the whole rolling skill check system. So we're going to have both dice and cards kind of working together here. So the multiple purposes, we have the journey. Players must contribute at least one card to each journey made by the unit. If they do not have any cards, they put one in from the deck toward the journey without looking at it. Okay, so I guess you can have 0 cards in your hand. I'll be curious to see what that means. Having 0 cards, that is. Initiative. The player who reveals the highest card or the antagonist with the highest printed initiative chooses who acts first in each combat. Cards revealed for this purpose are not discarded. Players without any cards may discard an initiative card from the deck, which is not added to their hand. I'm not sure how that will work, but that's one way. But at least this one with initiative, you don't lose them. +1. A card may be spent during a skill roll to add a +1 effect of the player's choice to the roll. So you have another. So you had whatever your attribute to add to manipulate for those skill rolls. You can also use your cards. Whispers. Many whispers require a card to be discarded or burnt to power the magic. That's cool. So it also ties into your magic use. Healing. In combat, cards can be spent on a 1-to-1 basis to negate damage done to your character. Out of combat, a card can be burnt at any time to heal any one attribute point. Any one attribute, 1 point. This implies taking a break, mentally preparing yourself, or bandaging your wounds. And then character growth. At the end of a mission, characters can spend sets of cards to increase their attributes and skill. In general, the number of cards needed is 1 more than the number of the new rank in the skill or attribute. For example, buying a 4th pip in Brawn requires discarding 5 cards. See the end of character creation for the full details. All right. Probably a lot packed in there. We'll have to kind of see how it works. So I definitely am curious to how. Are you keeping cards in between adventures? Does that mean that it's definitely an interesting way of leveling up? If you know you have 6 cards, which is really good, but you want to raise up that skill, now you're going to be down to 2 cards, and you're weakening yourself on a granular level to get that permanent bonus increase. So it's definitely an interesting option. Which Joker's which? Traditionally, card decks have a Joker with a colored image called the Red Joker and a Joker with a black and white version of the same name called the Black Joker. Other decks of cards may have 2 different images or 2 identical Jokers. Examine your deck before play so you can decide which Joker is which. Well, they read my mind. I was exactly asking myself, because I know a lot of, especially if you get different sort of specialized decks, they have all kinds of interesting illustrations for Jokers that I'm not sure follow the color and black and white. Though some do, I'm sure. Corruption. Certain instances will cause a player to draw for corruption or take a chance of corruption. These include whisper effects, adversary abilities, mission incidents using the Black Joker, and character advancement. Whispers ranks 3, 4, and 5. So I guess if you're using Whispers, I believe is the magic. When a corruption chance occurs, the player draws a card from the deck and looks at it without revealing the card to other players. If it is a black card, the character gains 1 corruption point. If it is a red card, no corruption occurs. After the player sees the card, they pass it to the narrator, who also looks at it. The narrator keeps a secret record of each character's total corruption. Corruption is not cleared at the end of missions, though there may be chances to shed corruption during specific mission incidents. If any character has 5 corruption points at the end of a mission, they do not return to base with the unit, as they have now joined the others. Ooh, the others with a capital O. If at any time somebody has 3 corruption, the narrator can choose to add from the deck to the journey 1 card per player with 3 corruption. If at any time someone has 4 corruption, then the narrator can choose to add up to 2 cards to the journey per player with 4 corruption. This represents chaotic outside influence on the unit. The players and narrator should both keep track of corruption. The player may not wish to write down their character's corruption because that is supposed to be a secret. The narrator should keep a written log because there may be modifications to the journey deck, mission elements, or adversary interactions based on corruption levels. As characters gain more corruption, this illustrates their slow loss of humanity. How much they roleplay their corruption is up to the player. As a character takes more corruption, they may not make the most optimal choices to assist the party, accomplish missions, or win contributing cards to the journey. In general, however, they are still trying, perhaps in a twisted way, to work with the unit until the moment they are fully corrupted and wander away from humans. Okay. Well, the corruption is very interesting. I mean, are some players really going to make suboptimal choices because they're highly corrupt? I don't know. I suppose if you really get into it, they could. I am glad that they're leaving it. Hey, it's up to the player how they do it, because I would hate to have that pressure of certain, however they're calling their referees in this game, or the narrator having to have, hey, you should be playing your corruption more. Right here it says, look, if the player wants to just play it like some influence that is in the back of in the marrow of their bones, but isn't affecting their mind yet, and it's still effective because they're adding cards to the journey, and things are more difficult because they are there, that's fine. But if they want to make it more of their performance, whatever, then that's good too. Walking the Path says, honestly, I'd probably strip the setting from the system. Yeah, potentially. I mean, that's always, there's always an option, right? You love the setting, the system isn't grabbing you. Yeah, strip it out. All right, so maybe I should pass over combat. I'm just going to kind of go through it. Initiative order from the cards. Seems like we're still using the same kind of target number system. We have defense. They're using armor. Oh, but armor, I guess it's more like D&D. So it's armor is kind of their term for hard to hit. Does not, looks like it's not, can't tell from here. Looks like it's not damage absorbing, just harder to hit. All right, we have a sample combat. I'm going to skip. I'm kind of interested in the whispers, though. It's just such a cool word for magic. Such a cool word for magic. Wonder if it's going to be different. I'll read the part about the spell caster, because I am interested in that. So some stuff has happened. It's a mob of 3 common soldiers led by a Veil Priest. I love these creature names. Or I guess the Veil Priest, is it a creature or is it just a NPC, human NPC? I'm not sure. Probably an other, capital O. So it's Roth's turn. Ross knows whispers. She has 3 training in elemental rituals and 4 ranks of smarts. Because she is using magic, her attack must be exactly planned before rolling dice. She decides she will attempt to deal 2 damage to one of the common soldiers with a blast of wind. She needs a total of 3 successes for this attack. 2 to meet the brawn defense of the common soldier, and a 3rd success to buy a 2nd point of damage. Any card will do to activate the whisper and grant her 1 success, so her player discards her 6 of clubs. Then they buy an additional die and roll 2, 2, 5, and 3. They bump the 3 up to a 5 using some of her remaining smarts points and get the 3 successes she needs. The spell deals 2 damage, killing one of the enemy soldiers. And then, because it was that person's turn, they select who goes next, which is that, sounds like that Greyhawk initiative, I think was like that, or Popcorn initiative, or one of I saw a while back, where whoever has initiative calls out the next person. So, it was Roth's turn. She says who goes next. So presumably all the characters are going to go together, but I suppose there could be some strategies to then saying, hey, you enemy go next. But of course, once it's that enemy's turn, then the narrator is going to start choosing. And so it might be easier just to have all the players go together, but it's kind of a cool system. And then we get some damage for stuff, which I will gloss over. You do have some kind of critical type stuff. So if it's got critical, you roll, I guess these are weapon abilities. We have aim, reroll a damage die from the critical ability. Assault, ignore armor on the next attack against the target, regardless of the attacker. Critical, roll a d6 for damage instead of taking the flat damage that is in the table above. Flurry, immediately make another attack against the same or different target. Fragmentation, deal damage to 1d6 targets. Spray, you can add an additional target. Stun, all other targets unaffected by stun must act in initiative before the affected character. So it's basically they're pushed back to the end of the initiative order. And then Wreck permanently reduces the armor of the target by 1. So it's cool. So you have some really simple abilities that you could put on there. So, an assault rifle would have that assault ability. You could, if you're a monk type with flurry of blows, and that flurry allows you to make an extra attack. Fragmentation grenades deal damage to 1d6 targets. If you have a gun that allows you to spray, you get to add a target. Pretty cool because it's very has a lot of the flavor and kind of things, but all the descriptions are extremely simple. It's not. I kind of like with like the fragmentation. Sure, we could go into the weeds and say, okay, we're going to get out our protractors or whatever, and we're going to not our protractors, whatever our compasses, and we're gonna get our, like we have to do. I remember playing particularly really from 3rd edition and 4th edition, pretty much anything using the grids, and we actually had these cutouts of the different shapes. You're trying to find the shape for the blast radius and putting it over the things and doing all that and spending 10 minutes trying to jiggle it around to get the most people. I kind of like this and saying, look, you just hit D6 targets, and it seems to be it's kind of set up for theater of their mind, so we're not going to be particularly concerned about how far away they are from each other. We're just going to say, hey, roll D6. I kind of like it. You get the same effect, basically, of the fragmentation without having to do a bunch of the geometry and mathematics that you would with a crunchier system. Sometimes it's fun to do that. Sometimes you just want to get to the action, and this I feel like it's kind of gets us where we want to be. We have general equipment. We have vehicles. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but we do have tanks. These are those World War I style tanks. Do they even call them Panzers? Not sure, but we got them. We got them if you want them. Now we get to Whispers. I will read this telegram because it's short. Dated June 30th, 1916, to William Robertson in London. Messages: the papers you sent can't be deciphered. Stop Kaiser. Oh, sorry. The papers you read can't be deciphered. Stop. Kaiser must be planning something big. Stop. We'll keep working on our end. Stop. This may require calling in non-military experts. Stop. Are you sure you want to go down this road? Stop. I forgot that when that style of writing out telegrams. Now we get to the Whispers. Basically, it's magic. The powerful beings from beyond the veil whisper. All right, lost my top to my bottle. Whisper through the cracks in reality. Those who choose to listen to the whispers learn how to manipulate reality. Individuals may style themselves as keepers of ancient knowledge or as heralds of the earth's new masters. They may call what they do magic or arcane arts or little tricks. They can adopt whatever names, clothing, and trappings they desire. Robes, cards, hand gestures, old books, necklaces of bones. No matter what it looks like or what they call it, their power is ultimately coming from the others, and the more powerful they become, the more of their humanity they lose in the process. And we get some whisper paths. Oh, well, I don't know. Do I need to go through the steps of casting a whisper? I think we kind of get it at this point, right? I'm more interested in the kind of the fictional stuff. So we have different whisper paths. One is called blood rites. Casters willing to use their own blood as a source of power. Becomes much harder to stop until they bleed themselves dry. For each blood rite they use, they must take 1 damage to brawn. This counts as 1 automatic success. Many rites do not require a skill roll because the blood mage targets themselves. They may take additional brawn damage themselves, or allies may take the damage to create additional successes. 1 point of damage per success. This additional damage may be taken before or after rolling the dice. And then it's got some, I don't know, so that it's got a strength. The caster becomes supernaturally strong. Scabs creates a tough second skin. Speed, they become supernaturally fast. Interject, caster decides when they act in initiative. Bloodblade, magical blood streams from the caster's open wounds and forms a solid object to cut into enemies. Ugh. They attack target's brawn and deals 1 damage. It also says +1 damage. Flurry, the attack may be made from range 1. And then you have the blood double. When the caster would take damage instead, their body explodes into a pool of blood and the caster appears unhurt nearby. It lasts until used or until the end of combat. That's gross, but cool. Rotten Tricks. With Rotten Tricks, the caster forces their own body to spew forth noxious clouds of a magical nature. It's a disgusting process and leaves the caster's mouth covered with sores and the taste of bile. All tricks require a successful whisper skill. All right, that's kind of gross. If the attack roll fails, the vile cloud is still released onto the battlefield. The caster must then immediately succeed at a different skill roll listed with each whisper, or the cloud blows back on the caster and any allies, making them suffer the whisper's effect instead. Is this a different path? I guess it must be. So the first path we looked at was Blood Rites. So this is Rotten Tricks. Still air. After several deep breaths, the caster inhales deeply and creates a complete magic barrier around themselves and any willing allies. Retch. The caster vomits a stream of foul-smelling acid towards the nearby target. Poison. A cloud of thick yellow or pale green smoke pours from the caster's mouth and nose with a burning sensation, which the caster may send against living targets. Smoke. With a series of racking coughs and powerful sneezes, the caster fills the area around a target with gray smoke, which is cold, almost like fog, and lays thickly in low areas. Strange Wind. By screaming into the sky, the caster creates a buffeting wind that blows against the target from all directions. Swamp Gas. With a resounding burp and a powerful exhalation, the caster sends a wave of stinking gas at one target. I really like these because it's very much in the flavor of sort of gas attacks. You know, somebody mentioned in the chat mustard gas. So that's very, has really the flavor of the Great War, the trenches, and all that stuff. Very evocative, and I definitely like the risk reward of, okay, if you do this, you're sending it to your enemies. If you fail, you're getting it yourselves. Another thing that Scabs, that's the worst armor spell I've ever heard of. Just the sound of it, it's gross, but hey, if it works, if it keeps you alive. Now we get the old ways. Some secrets were gleaned from the others long ago and have been passed on in secret from teacher to pupil throughout the ages. These ancient ways are generally the least powerful of whispers, but they are also less costly for the caster. The old ways do not require anything more than a successful whisper skill roll against the target's defense. However, most of the whispers have no effect unless they also add augments. In this, we get the Wolf's Head. Prayer and a few taps to the face grants a target wolf-like senses superior to a human. The Heart's Hooves. A poem in an ancient tongue grants a target deer-like speed superior to a human. Befriend. The caster looks an animal in the eye and calms or redirects their fear and aggression. If you're Crocodile Dundee, you get that spell for free. Sickness. By blowing some dust into the air, the caster puts a simple hex on a target. Healing Circle. With raised arms and an ancient chant, a healing aura forms around the caster. And then finally, Grove. If some living plants can be found before sunset, the caster can lay down as if to sleep and create the illusion of a peaceful forest clearing. All willing allies may sleep peacefully for the night, and nothing enters the grove to disturb the sleepers. That's kind of a really nice one, too, and also kind of thematic. And then we get Elemental Smarts, which came up in the example. Study of the basic elements and energies of the universe allows the caster to command the forces of nature. The elements can be forced to accomplish a simple task or to attack a foe. Fire. Command of flames, explosions, and heat. The caster may maintain command of non-attack effects by forfeiting their action to concentrate. Oh, so okay, just command flames, explosions, and heat. That's cool. Water. Command of rivers, lakes, and the ocean. Earth. Command of rocks, mud, and plants. I feel like Earth would be super handy in No Man's Land. Air. Command of wind, storms, and fog. Star. Command of the night sky and stars. Mental Anguish. The caster attempts to destroy a target's psyche. Healing. Oh, that's the last one. So finally, that's... I feel like with some of these, the spacing... I mean, it's not that there's no thing to tell one section from the other, but it's a little bit tricky. And I kind of ran afoul of that where I started... My mind and my mouth were ripping along before my eyes caught up to the fact that, nope, this is a new what do they call it? Whispers. What are we calling these? whisper paths. This path is healing words. Not all the whispers speak of wholesale destruction. Some find in the muttering of the others charms for extending life and even words of hope. You get body heal. Target recovers brawn damage, but cannot be healed beyond their maximum. Mind rest. Target recovers smarts damage. Spirit charge. Target recovers guts damage. Did we get a list of all their attributes? And I guess that's the end. So that one's just basically about, I think those are your attributes. Brawn, smarts, and guts. But I don't feel like we've seen it written down unless I rolled past it too fast. Okay, so now we get, are these, I guess these are still part of healing words. Holiday, a group ritual which eases tension and lifts spirits. So you can kind of do a little holiday. Then we have the mercy aura. The caster surrounds themselves with a pale aura which draws in spiritual energy. Oh, here we go. When a player character dies, the healer may take a random card from the hand of the deceased, if any remain. The effect lasts until used or until the end of combat. What does that mean? I guess you could take those cards to do stuff with, kind of like you're pulling energy from the dead person. Sense corruption. The caster's hand appears to turn to glass. Touching a target grants insight into the target's soul. That's pretty neat too. And now we have another path that's called Chaos Songs. By embracing direct connection to the others, the follower of this whisper path learns chthonic prayers unspoken since ancient times. Ya ya Cthulhu Fatagan. And becomes a mad jester dancing to insane music made by alien horrors. Yeah, this is the path that's really going to lean into what's happening. This is the Renfield caster. Make them flee. The caster strikes up a threatening chant which invokes fear in those who hear it. Allies may join the chant, but they must suffer one guts damage as well. I kind of like the fact that the allies can can join it to make it stronger, but then have to take some damage. Hold them fast. With a low-pitched droning wail, the caster roots those who hear it in place with fear. Puts them off. With a series of annoying screeching calls, the caster ruins a target's ability to focus on fighting. Draw their ire, making a raspy cooing noise and halting movements reminiscent of a dying bird. The caster makes themselves nearly impossible to ignore. I bet. Stare them down. Locking eyes with the target, the caster lets the target look through their own eyes into the emptiness beyond the veil. And then finally, steal their dreams. The caster walks through the mind of a victim and may take something away with them. Oh, okay. So they can kind of take cards, do some other stuff. Pretty neat. We do get a journal entry from Alfred. I think I'll read this one. July 1st, 1916. The fighting today was terrible. So many dead, so many wounded. More on their side than ours, hopefully. We are all weary tonight, and yet sleep is hard to find. Not just because of the death, but because of what happened after. An hour or so after sunset, the air grew unnaturally quiet. I looked around. Everyone seemed to notice. Thomas used his periscope to have a look over at the enemy. Good God, he hissed. What do you see? I asked. The Germans are coming up out of their holes, he said. We didn't believe it at first. The Germans were going over the top, as if there was something in their trenches that terrified them more than our gunners. Then we heard the yelling, the cries of all those men echoing out across the field of shells and wire. It's a trap, I said, as Thomas made toward the ladder. They'll shoot you. He went out over anyway, and when he didn't fall back down riddled with bullets, more of us took courage and went over ourselves. I could see them, the Germans, stumbling, crawling, hiding wherever they could, more of them coming up over the top into no man's land. Then, before any of us knew what was happening, a flash of light filled the field, so dazzling white it blinded us. But there was no explosion, no gas, no shrapnel. The light lasted not more than a few seconds, and then it was gone. Fear sent us back into our hole. We waited, ready for the Germans to come pouring into our trench, but they didn't. Yet we could still hear the Germans calling to each other, Monster! Monster! Woo-hoo-hoo! Creepy! Creepy! I like it. And we got more of these. I don't know if I have it in me to read all of these. Let me see what's coming up next. I'm going to skip over the character creation. I'm really more... Okay, so it is 3 attributes. I do kind of think... I really like this, and I feel like their system is good. But man, I'm always the opinion that as much as possible. If you can define something before you start throwing the term around, it's great. So I would have liked at the beginning to know that we've got these 3 attributes, brawn, smarts, and guts, before they get into everything. But now we kind of get it. You're just going to take 10 points divided amongst the 3 of them. You could probably roll some dice too to figure that out if you wanted to avoid the analysis paralysis, but they can't, obviously with only 10 points, they can't be super high. You have to have a minimum in 1 in each. And the average human ability is 3 and the peak is 6. Anything more than 6, you're talking supernatural or superhuman. So you could probably roll a d6 also if you wanted to roll that, and you don't care so much about the 10-point stuff. But otherwise, you can use 10 points. And then we have some attributes, or the attributes govern your health, your defense, your skill manipulation. And then you have other stuff, gender, sexuality, personal history, that you can kind of come up with yourself. And then as far as training, I'm not going to go over the skill list, but it's your general soldiery, First World War-y kind of stuff. And then the magic, the whisper. Let's see. Then you assign 3 skill dice amongst your trained skills. And then you're deployed, where you draw 3 cards representing your starting mental and emotional resources. So from the deck, you just take 3 cards, and that's what you start with. We do have some box text called Who is in Charge, which is a good question to ask since you're soldiers. And oftentimes in these kind of war things, I always think it's a mistake to put one player character in charge of other player characters, unless they're, really adult. I don't want to say serious, but people you can trust that aren't just going to start abusing it or pulling rank or just being a jerk about it. And sometimes someone you think is not going to be a jerk turns out to be a jerk, and it can be. And look, let's face it, there's an appeal to it because sometimes it can be. Kind of feel like this is my moment to start bossing. I can boss this guy around, or gal, whomever. I can boss him around. Never going to get a chance to do it again, so I'm going to do it now. Just, but of course it makes it unfun. Who is in charge? Never Going Home is intended to focus on low-ranking soldiers sent on missions by officers who stay in the relative safety of their mission offices behind the front lines. Once the unit goes out on a mission, no one is there to make their decisions for them or end arguments with, "But I outrank you." Soldiers in the field will have to work things out as equals or pick their own leaders. Of course, in a proper military organization, someone is always in charge. If you want to incorporate ranks, a chain of command, and field promotions into your games, feel free to do so. At the start of any mission with a ranking officer, that officer may take a chance on corruption, then draw 4 cards from the deck and distribute them among the soldiers of the unit as they see fit, respecting the hand size limit. The officer may keep some or all of the cards. So if you want to do a chain of command thing, you can, but you don't have to. I probably wouldn't. Or I would do something where I might say, every mission, we're going to rotate. You're going to rotate who's the officer in command. That way everyone will get a chance to, and I mean rotate players, not rotate characters. So if your character dies and you were going to be next up in the rotation, you're going to be next up with your next character, not, you get passed over. Kind of thing. And that way everybody gets a chance to do it. And then if someone decides to be selfish with drawing those cards, it just means you're creating the chance that someone's going to be selfish down the line, which hopefully will mean that person won't just do that. And there's my first whatchamacallit in the chat. I'll block you. Thank you. Get that out of there. Spam. First chat in the spam. 54 minutes in, so not a bad run for no spam in the chat. Okay, I like quoting Dan Carlin, Hardcore History. That's cool. I'm a big fan of Dan Carlin's podcast. If you like history podcasts, really good. We have another telegram. July 6th, 1916. To Douglas Haig, Longueval, urgent. Intercepted messages from Kaiser's men. Stop. Germans are fighting amongst themselves. Stop. Beasts and monsters from another world. Stop. French can't be reached. Stop. What is happening at the Somme? Stop. Send reply to Robertson. Post haste. Stop. we get in this section, it's called The World at War, The Progress of Events 1914 to July 1916, which starts with a quote from Dan Carlin from the podcast Blueprint for Armageddon 4. I've been comparing this period to I've been comparing this period to an historical estuary where one generation and another generation sort of mingle, the old world and the new world. But maybe it's more of a wormhole through time. And when this 19th century group of people transitions through to the 20th century, it's not going to make it intact. It's going to suffer damage on the way through. It's like a birthing process to the modern era, and that can be bloody and painful and potentially fatal too. Oh, soon after that first spam is gone, then the next spam comes in. Nothing says the player in charge has to want to be in charge, but the players not in charge have to want that too. It can work, but the players have to be excited about having a leader. Yeah, I mean, sometimes, and there are definitely going to be groups where some players don't want to be in the front of the decision-making process and are happy to give that over to somebody else. And of course, there are many groups in which someone is always dying to be the decision maker. And if you get that intersection with some folks who want to kind of be in the back seat, so to speak, or not be in the driver's seat, and you have someone who really wants to be in the driver's seat, it can totally work. Yeah. I'm always wary of the people who want to be in charge. It's kind of like that old thing about politicians. The people who should be politicians should be the ones who don't want it. Let's see. I want to get through. So here we just have we're getting some background. I definitely want to read more on the background stuff when things go eldritch. So I'm trying to kind of scan through here to see where we might get to that. So we're getting, okay, so I'll read this paragraph. In January 1916, Sir Douglas Haig, commander of the British First Army, began planning an operation to, quote, to wear out the enemy and exhaust his reserves, unquote. The plans would develop throughout the spring and be known to history as the Somme Offensive. It was a massive undertaking that involved moving troops, building barracks, and transporting water and food, all of which involved building roads, railways, and pumping stations. As the situation at Verdun, where French forces had undergone a German offensive for months, worsened, General Joseph Joffre, commander-in-chief of the French armed forces at the Western Front, pushed Haig to start the big push at the Somme no later than July 1st, 1916, if he wanted the offensive to be a joint operation. This is where our story begins. Bum, bum, bum. Now we get The World Broken, The Veil Torn, July 1916. On the first day of the Battle of the Somme, 1 July 1916, 30,000 people were killed. If the others were already looking at the world and pushing on the fabric of reality, this massive number of dead and even more enormous number who lay wounded on the battlefield was the final push tearing the veil between worlds. No one close enough to see what the tearing looked like survived to describe it. They were overwhelmed by the first wave of corrupt energies and turned into the first heralds of the terrible new reality. Those further away from the center of the tearing saw a bright light, and most took it for a great explosion or some terrible new weapons. Those sensitive to the world beyond its material surface began to hear the whispers almost immediately. Some few of these resisted the cloying voices of the others long enough to write down their impressions. At first, the voices were not whispers, but seemed like screaming in the minds of those able to hear. And now we have some more entries from Alfred's journal. I think I'll read these two, or at least the first one, and I'll see how I feel after that. Dated July 8th, 1916. I awoke last night to the sound of sniffing. I thought it was a dog, but we didn't bring any with us from Verdun. I looked around in the darkness, trying to find the animal, for surely it was making an animal noise and gave an animal smell. It was a large one, judging from the depth of the sounds it makes. Deep grumblings and hissings. As I came more fully awake, I realized it was above me, at the lip of the trench. I moved to stand, but someone caught my arm. It was William, and his eyes were full of terror. I started to ask, "What's the matter?" But I didn't get the words out before I heard it. A great unearthly shrieking, and coming from whatever it was sitting atop the trench. It barked and called and scratched the ground with its huge feet, sending chunks of earth raining down around us. My heart was in my throat. I was paralyzed with fear. I clutched my gun, waiting. Then it moved off at a fast pace, calling into the night, its heavy footsteps echoing across the ever-stillness of the night. "Did you see it?" I dared to whisper to William. He nodded, fright still hanging over his features. "What was it?" He just shook his head at me. I don't know, he answered. It wasn't natural, Alfred. It was a monster. Mm-hmm. Hey, Lincoln. Lincoln says Tolkien's experience of the Somme influenced all of the battles in his books. Yeah, I don't think he ever said so specifically, but I mean, it's one of those things that you just can't. I don't think we can collectively imagine that stuff didn't influence him. And yeah, I think definitely you can see in the way that he wrote about the stuff that yeah, it was a big time influence on him, and he was already knowledgeable about these things in older works, in things. And it's very interesting when I think one of the things that people talk about going back, way far back to say things like the Iliad is how when you read about how that writer Homer or whoever finally wrote down the epic poem, how specific and graphic the wounds and things they will talk about is, that clearly was coming from somebody. And of course, in that time frame, I think if you were someone of age, you were fighting in battles, you pretty much didn't have much choice. But how this came from kind of personal battlefield experience, what they were talking about. And yeah, most definitely. And I think it also is something that just in a larger thing, when I forget the name of the blog that had gone through and looked at kind of the military historical grounding of the things that happened, say in the Lord of the Rings, how that stuff holds up really well. Definitely the literary versions more than Peter Jackson's versions, and that can come down to the fact that yeah, Tolkien knew the stuff he was talking about a lot more, both I'm sure on a philosophical level, but also on a practical level. All right, let's get to that second journal entry dated July 9th, 1916. Officer Bailey disappeared in the night. No one saw him leave. We searched up and down the trenches, but there was no sign of him. Wherever he went, he didn't take any of his supplies or belongings. We found his pack stashed in his dugout, one of the sturdier ones with planks fortifying the sides. Someone has drawn symbols all over the boards. Someone. Bailey. It had to be him. No one knows what they mean. They aren't like any language we've ever seen. John crosses himself, walking off down the trench by himself, muttering and cursing as he goes. William's face has gone white. I look at Thomas. He shrugs and shakes his head. Did you see him do it? William asks us. What is this? Witchcraft? Tom puts his hand on William's shoulder, steadying him, as we all contemplate what Bailey has gotten himself into. Oh, Bailey, you scamp, you. Whew. Definitely well done for the atmospherics. The veil. The veil is nothing new. In fact, it is something quite old. Our ancestors understood it. They feared it. They tried to appease it. Sometimes they worshipped it and even tried to use it. It is known, has been known, and despite the early 20th century claims of advancement, science, learning, and reason conquering the superstitious beliefs of early peoples, we never quite forgot it. Still, the question has never been satisfactorily answered. What is the veil? That may be a question better left unanswered, but the time for that has passed. Understanding it matters if humanity is going to survive. To put it succinctly, the veil is the membrane between this world and all others. Much later in human history, if it survives the great unending war, humanity would begin to better understand the nature of the universe, and that there are multiple dimensions, multiple existences. Between them all is the veil. In most cases, the veil is impermeable. No science can pierce it. No energy massive enough can disrupt it. Not the titanic force of stars exploding, nor the reality-wrenching depths when they collapse to a single point. However, there is something about life, or maybe thought, or will itself, which punches right through the veil under the right circumstances. It is possible that the others discovered this, although, given their capricious and corrupt nature, they more likely stole the secrets of the veil off the bloated corpse of some other long-lost civilization of greater beings. Who knows how many times, if time is even a factor to beings outside of known existence, the veil has been discovered, analyzed, and ripped. Perhaps 1,000 civilizations have discovered the potential and the power to cross dimensions and realities, ascending to some higher plane of existence. Perhaps 1,000 times as many reached for such lofty goals, only to fall to murder, mayhem, and madness on a scale unimaginable. Now, it is humanity's turn. We have discovered it the way all others before us likely discovered it. The veil is most vulnerable to intense psyche, thought, will, whatever it may be. When the mind is at its most focused and coherent, it can slice through the veil. In most cases, this only occurs at the most intense moment of a being's life, at the moment of a violent or painful death. At that instant, the human mind is at its most focused. This is why humans have cast others into volcanoes, carved their hearts out on altars of stone underneath the stars, and thrown the innocent into raging fires throughout history. Those moments send needles stabbing through the veil, like pinpricks through the ether. Through those pinpricks, ancient peoples whispered their desires, wishes, and curses to whoever was listening on the other side. Usually it failed, but sometimes it worked. Something listened and, for whatever reason, acted. But those small moments where the veil was pierced were brief and fleeting. The veil healed itself quickly, closing again to its old, relatively impermeable self. However, there is a way to permanently weaken the veil, to keep the tears open longer, to do more than just whisper. It just requires a lot more people dying at once. A whole lot more, like those who died in the early battles of the Great War. Once all that death weakened the veil, even rent it permanently in places, things changed. It was too much for the veil to heal back from. Even when it did recover, new tears, new calamities, more death just occurred elsewhere soon after. Crouched, waiting, hungering, in the in-between places of reality, space, and time were the others. Yes, sir. Our universe alone is unspeakably vast. The entirety of all universes, all time, all realities is something the human mind can never truly even begin to grasp. The same goes for most other beings as well, even the others. One may be able to pierce the veil through death, or, in the case of those who seek to master magic, sheer willpower. However, poking through to another reality that's habitable, or which is even compatible with your own on the most basic primordial level, would be like winning the lottery, every day for a year. So the others instead just wait and reach out across the veil, like a spider on its web, for some unfortunate or foolish species to pluck at the strands. When one does so, the others rush to the breaches, whispering from out the darkness, teaching their new acolytes how to use the very essence of the veil, the very fabric that keeps reality together. To the receiving species, this seems like a boon. Those who are sensitive to the others' whisperings, who can understand it, and who can focus their will without being tossed into a volcano or having their hearts ripped out, learn to manipulate the veil. They learn to perform magic. But every spell is a trauma. Every casting, a calamity. Every invocation is akin to convincing the mind it is in its dying moments. The mind does not hold up well under that kind of regular onslaught. Neither does the veil or reality. And that's why the others whisper. The more one uses magic, the more one tears at the veil. The more a species uses magic, invariably the more wide-scale death and destruction occurs, and the more the veil tears, the more the veil is torn, the weaker it gets. The weaker it gets, the easier it is to move in between realities. The easier it is to move between realities, the more things slip through to prey and hunt and feast. The species subjected to this then feels compelled to use its newfound gifts to combat those things. The veil is thus weakened more. More slip through, more death, more magic, more war, less veil, until, well, that's perhaps a question, like, what is the veil? That is better left unanswered. Yes, sir. No, nothing says it. That's some good lore. Yes, sir, that is some good lore indeed. Good lore, well written, well lored. Absolutely. Now we get a letter from Mary Warbeck that was tucked inside Alfred's journal. Dated July 12th, 1916. Alfred, hopefully this letter reaches you. Mother and I are desperate for news. It's been weeks since you wrote us that they were moving you from Verdun to the Somme. The things they are saying of the war are awful. Tell me they are not true. Charlotte had a letter from her husband yesterday about the first day of the battle. So much death. How could so many die in one day? We pray that you are not numbered among the dead or missing. We read also that there was a great flash of light on the field and that no one knows what it was. What does it mean? They also say that the Germans have taken hold of our military leaders. The general himself is corrupted and fighting for the other side? Alfred, how? How can these things be true? Charlotte's husband wrote of great beasts and dark creatures coming in the night. He sounded like a madman. I think Charlotte believes he has gone quite insane. What is happening on the front? Please write us as soon as you can so that we know you are safe. Your dearest sister, Mary. Oh, Mary, if only you knew. You poor, poor child. All right, let me see. I just need to peek ahead because I know we're over an hour. I don't have super much stuff. Let's try to see how much we have left here. Ooh, a lot. A lot. Oh my gosh. I probably will have to do this over a couple days because I don't want to stop now. I feel like I could have skipped a bunch of the earlier stuff on the system that's not as important to me. Right. So we're here, 35. All right. I think I'm going to stop this one. Oh, went the wrong way. As we get to No Man's Land. It is really good stuff. This is the stuff that I think is again, I don't want to downplay. Look, the system is fine. I'm sure it's good, and I'm intrigued. It definitely has some interesting things about it, but I think for me, like for most of you out there, the main pull of this is this really intriguing setting, and we're getting into that setting stuff, which is great. I mentioned at the top of the stream, theoretically tomorrow, I should have an interview from one of the folks over there at Wedding Games, but they haven't gotten back to me yet. It's one of those things that we kind of we set up the interview a while back for tomorrow, but the holiday season being what it is, everything being in flux, there is the potential that I might have to reschedule or they can't make it. Because like I said, we set it up. We set it up a while back. Let's see. I don't have these direct messages on Twitter don't have dates, but it was like right after PAX. So at the beginning of the month, a couple of weeks ago. So if that falls through, if we don't end up getting to the interview tomorrow, which might happen, I'll definitely update the community tab on YouTube. I will update it. If the interview falls through, then I will push the stream from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. to keep it in line with this one. And then I'll continue this because this is really good stuff. If the interview does happen, then we'll take up with this the next day. We shall see. Hey, Ovaltine Patrol's here. Hey, Ovaltine Patrol. Says, I've kind of noticed Fantastical World War I coming up in conversation as a game setting in the last few years. Really? I don't think I'd seen it before, but I've seen like World War Weird and things like that. And I don't know which World War that's referring to. It's definitely intriguing. I mean, there is some overlap with Cthulhu stuff, which can be about this time, though I don't know if any of the Cthulhu things take place specifically during the war as opposed to slightly after it, or I guess what Alyssa Faden and her things working on being slightly before it. But it's definitely interesting. I mean, I'm looking at their concept of the veil. You could do so much with it. There are just so many different things. Like you get a Civil War. Talk about a lot of people dying in a short amount of time. Civil War would be kind of a perfect spot to have this. Obviously, World War II could be really interesting. Certainly, if you want to look at all kinds of different historical time periods in which there was big battles and things happening, we could have these, even if it's not as wholesale renting of the veil as it is here, these localized things. I feel like you could really do a lot with, almost like a Numenera kind of thing, but not other. I mean, you could have other settings too. I mean, really, you could adapt this concept of the veil to something that could be in a fantasy game and then connecting with other things. Because it seems to be talking about, look, all kinds of different worlds could be connected through the veil. If you wanted to have a different way of transporting people from setting to setting or having overlap between settings, something like this could be happening. You could have this in your fantasy game in which imagine you have your sort of, your demon occultist kind of thing trying to open up a portal, but you're using this veil concept. And it would be cool to think about, well, what if they were opening and their concept of these people they were trying to bring in, or these beings, were Nazis, let's say, right? So what a twist that would be to your players when they think that they're going to be summoning Orcus or some kind of demon. And no, they're just summoning into this fantasy, medieval campaign, SS with, panzers and, and sort of somewhat modern technology, or maybe, who knows, something else, maybe World War One, right? They're opening up a rent that's going to bring them, stuff from World War One or World War Two, something like that. You could have a lot of Oh, Bob Monsla's Octung Cthulhu. Thank you. I'd forgotten about that. So yes, they do have that. So very, very, very cool. Like I said, I hadn't seen it come up, but I think there's a lot of really interesting ways you could play with it. Now, nothing says I'd have a history where the Permian extinction led to all sorts of elder god things. That's the new vile creatures are waking up. Yeah, that's a cool thing to think of too. Old VB Troll says Math Death leads to the return of magic was used in the computer RPG Lionheart in the early 2000s. It used the same system as Fallout 1 and 2, but was set contemporary to the Renaissance. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I think there's a lot of things. I mean, I really like the idea of the magic. It definitely, I think we talked about the other streams about magic and in some systems and things, how magic is less weird. It feels more commonplace. And some of that's kind of by design. If you're playing in kind of a Harry Potter world and you're a witch or a wizard, then magic is kind of commonplace. But then there's that other school of sort of sword and sorcery magic where all magic is weird and kind of mind altering and stuff. And this definitely brings back some of that with the different schools and kind of how you operate with them and how they tear at your humanity or pull it away or consume it to make things happen. Really cool stuff. And we got more cool stuff here, but I got to put it aside for now. Like I said, depending on how the interview thing comes tomorrow, if it pulls through, then I will do that and pick this up the next day. Or if it doesn't, then I will keep reading this. So just stay tuned. I will definitely update the community tab on the Facebook channel page with that information. Otherwise, if you don't mind giving this a thumbs up on your way out, I'd appreciate it. If you find yourself in here and not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. And it lets the algorithms know that people like this stuff and just keeps you informed on what's going on in the channel. Otherwise, hey, I hope everyone's having a great holiday season and continues to have a great holiday season. It has a great evening, morning, noon, night, whenever you end up watching or listening to this. Game on. I'll talk to you